everybody, so I'm making a how to sew video as promised earlier. Now I already have a how to sew video that a lot of people have seen and commented on, but I made that video probably like 2 years ago, and frankly it's really bad. Since then my ability to sew has improved a lot, I hope. So I don't want you to follow that video anymore, and I'm going to take it down. But I'm going to replace it with this much better video. So, I'm going to teach you how to sew. But I'm going to teach you how to sew my way. And you should know right off the bat that I don't sew the way most people sew. If you took a sewing class anywhere, they would not teach you to sew the way that I sew. And the reason is because I, first of all, don't measure anything, and second of all, taught myself 100%. So I just kind of figured it out on my own, and this is what works for me. It might or might not work for you. But what you're going to need is a pencil, some scissors, some thread, pins. Pins are very important. Don't skip on them. If you don't have them, go spend the $2 or $3 and get pins. You need a sewing needle or a sewing machine, whichever. And of course, you need your fabric. Another thing I should just mention, if you already know how to sew by hand or with a machine, this tutorial isn't really going to help you very much. This is meant for people who have no idea how to sew and kind of want to get started. First thing you gotta do is figure out how much fabric you need. So, what I usually start with is I take my fabric and I fold it in half. Usually, I get a lot more than this. For a shirt, I usually get like a yard, depending on how much sleeve area I need. For pants, I usually get like 2 yards. I'm pretty small though. I'm not tall and I'm not wide. So, if you're pretty tall or pretty wide, maybe you should get more than a yard. I get a t-shirt. Now you can get any t-shirt you want to use for this part. However, you gotta be careful, because it cannot, not ever be a t-shirt that stretches. It cannot stretch even a little bit. Why? Because if the t-shirt stretches, that means that it starts smaller than your body and stretches to get as wide as your body. You don't want that. Trust me. Please don't use a shirt that stretches. Use one that fits without stretching. It's better to use a baggy shirt that fits without stretching than a real tight shirt that has to stretch. Trust me. The reason is now you're going to trace your shirt. So, you want to take the arms and fold them in, because you're not tracing the arms, you're just tracing the body. Fold them in, lay your shirt down on your fabric, and just take a pencil. Make sure it's the back of your fabric, it's not the front, because you don't want the trace marks to be visible to anybody. So on the back of your fabric, the inside, just trace around your entire shirt. Then, when that's done, you can see how much of your fabric you need. So, hypothetically, if my shirt fit on this piece of fabric, then I know that this is long enough for my shirt. And I can just cut this across and have 2 pieces of fabric. That one has my shirt traced on it, and one is plain. You only need to trace the shirt once. Now that your shirt is traced, you want to try it on, because you're not gonna, since you didn't measure anything, it's not quite clear how the shirt is going to fit. You want to double check how it's going to fit. So, what you do is you put in your pins. And the pins should represent where the stitch from when you sew, where you're going to sew. That's what the pins should be. So you want to put them right on the line that you drew. But you only want to put them on the sides, like the sides of the shirt, and on the shoulders. You don't want to put them on your neck, and you don't want to put them on your armholes, because you can just stick your arms out, you need to stick your head out. And another note, on your shoulders, you want to only pin a little tiny bit. because the shoulders tend to be a little too tight and then you can't get it on over your head, you have to take it all off. So just pin like just enough on the shoulder. So now you've tried on your shirt, and if you need to, you've moved the pins around and tried it on again. If it's too big, move the pins while you have the shirt on to make it a little smaller until it fits and you can take it on and off. You might have to, pull it up over your head, but if you can get it on and off with the pins on and it fits nicely, it's not too tight, it's not too big, you're good. You're ready to go. So, your pins are in, your lines are drawn, it's time to actually sew. And what you need for this, obviously, is a needle and thread. Now, your thread should be the same color as your fabric or slightly darker. You don't want to go slightly lighter because slightly lighter is going to be visible. Slightly darker is less noticeable. So if you can't get the exact shade, go a little bit darker. Thread is another place where if you were doing traditional sewing where they have taught you how to sew, they would make you measure things. Oh, another note, this is only if you're sewing by hand. Personally, I sew 100% by hand. I hate using a machine. It ends up taking me longer than sewing by hand. However, my machine's an old piece of crap. If you have a nice new machine, go and use it. You're ready to go. Just sew along the lines that you drew, you're done. But if you don't have a machine or you don't know how to use it, etc., etc., sometimes, even if you have a machine, it's nice to know how to sew by hand because some things, delicate fabric and stuff, you want to just sew it by hand. So, if you're sewing by hand, you should measure to figure out how much thread you need. However, like I said, I don't measure anything. Nothing. So, what you're going to do now, instead of measuring, is kind of a rough guesstimate. If you're making a typical shirt, you're going to use kind of soft, regular fabric like this. So for regular stuff, the way I measure my thread is I go the length of the seam that I'm going to do from start to end, how long I have to sew, and then two times that, 3 times that. So 3 times the length of the seam. And the way I figure that out is I just take my thread, roll it along the seam, roll it back, I have 3 lengths. Then I cut it off, and now I have to put it on my needle. So the way I do that, just get the end a little wet, and put it through the needle. Now before you can start sewing, you have to make sure this is secure. And the way I do it is I just take the ends and I tie them. You don't want a super thick knot, you want a small knot at the end. So I usually tie it over like 3 times because thread is really thin. And I try to make sure it's really close to the end. I don't want a lot hanging off. So once it's tied, you're good to go. All you have to do is put it in, take it back out, and just up and down the seam. Make sure, again, you're working on the back of the fabric. And if you've been following the directions so far, you should be on the back, because you should have drawn your lines when you traced your shirt on the back of the fabric. So now you're going to sew along those lines that you drew. And what you're doing is you're sewing your 2 pieces together. So you should have 2 separate pieces of cloth that are pinned together, and you're sewing up along the pins on the line that you drew. And when you get all the way up to the end of your seam, you're just going to go in and out over and over, right over the same spot to make that end knot really, really tight, because you have to cut it off at the end and it has to be really tight so that it doesn't come out. So just go in and out over and over the same exact spot over and over and over again.